Bays of the World, written by Edward Allen Kurtz. Contents at a glance. What is a bay? A bay is a body of water that is partly surrounded by land. A bay is connected to a lake or an ocean, and the shoreline of a bay often curves inward, making a semi-circular shape. Coastlines are often made up of bays and headlands. Bays offer protection from strong winds and big waves. This means that bays are places where people can live safely near an ocean. Bays can be formed in several ways, and there are beautiful and interesting bays in places all over the world. Let's learn more about bays. Other names for bays. Bays are sometimes called by other names. Bays are sometimes called gulfs, but a gulf is usually bigger than a bay, but not always. For example, the Persian Gulf is smaller than Hudson Bay. Bays can also be called bights and sounds. A sound is usually deeper than a bight. A cove is a small bay that has a narrow entrance. It is often circular or oval in shape and part of a larger bay. A fjord is a bay with very steep cliffs. Norway is famous for its many fjords. A bay can be an estuary where a river empties into a sea or ocean. How bays are formed, Part 1. The biggest bays were created millions of years ago when the continents of Earth were being formed. At one time, all of the Earth's land was one big mass. This giant single continent is called Pangaea. The Earth's surface is made up of big areas called tectonic plates. These plates are like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. They moved, and Pangaea began to break up into the 7 continents that we have on Earth today. Certain places in the shorelines became curved, and some of these are now called bays. How bays are formed, Part 2. Bays can be formed in other ways, like when an ocean overflows into a coastline. For example, the South China Sea overflowed and created Kowloon Bay, Hong Kong. Another way that bays are created is from the movement of glaciers. A fjord is what we call a bay that was formed by a glacier. Erosion is a way that some bays have been formed. As waves and currents hit a shoreline, they can cause the coast to erode and bays are formed. If the coastal rocks are soft, they are easily eroded and a bay is created. Bays and headlands. But what if the rock along a coastline is not soft? What happens if the rock is hard? If the rock is hard, the waves and currents cannot form a bay as easily as when the rock is soft. This is why there are bays and headlands along many coasts. The waves and currents erode soft rock, and a bay is formed. It is surrounded by land on 3 sides. When the waves and currents cannot erode hard rock, a headland is formed. A headland is surrounded by water on 3 sides. Coastlines often have both bays and headlands. Bay wildlife. There is a huge variety of wildlife found in and around bays. This is partly due to the fact that bays are found along saltwater oceans as well as on freshwater lakes. Bays that are located on the coastline of an ocean have marine wildlife like sharks and whales. Bays that are on lakes have turtles and other freshwater animals. Many bays contain brackish water. This is where a river meets an ocean. Brackish means a combination of salt and fresh water. The eastern oyster lives in the brackish water of the Chesapeake Bay. People and bays. Bays are protected from strong winds and waves, and so they have always been good places for people to live. At first, people lived around bays because of this protection, and also because fishing was easy and safe in bays. Later, as trading between nations began, bays became harbors for ships, and then port cities were built. Today, there are many bays that serve as harbors and port cities. Mumbai, which used to be called Bombay, is an important port city in India. Baltimore is a port city on the Chesapeake Bay in the U.S. People and bays. Pollution. As more and more people began to live in bays, the harbors and cities grew larger, and soon the bays began to change. For example, about 150 years ago, gold miners dumped tons of dirt, rocks, and chemicals into San Francisco Bay in Northern California. This created marshes and made the bay smaller. It also caused pollution. Today, this bay and many other bays around the world have big problems with pollution. Dangerous agricultural chemicals and waste products from industries go into bays every day. The biggest bay in the world. The Bay of Bengal is the biggest bay in the world. It sits in the northeastern part of the Indian Ocean and is bordered by Bangladesh, Burma or Myanmar, India, and Sri Lanka. There are many rivers that run into the Bay of Bengal. These include famous rivers like the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, and the Irrawaddy rivers. There are several important port cities around the Bay of Bengal, like Chennai, Kolkata, and Yangon. There are also coral reefs and several famous islands in the Bay of Bengal, like the Andaman Islands and Nicobar. Famous bays. Chesapeake Bay. The Chesapeake Bay is a famous bay located in the mid-Atlantic area of the United States. Maryland sits on the northern part of the bay, and Virginia on the southern part. Over 150 rivers flow into the Chesapeake Bay. These rivers run through Delaware, Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, and Washington, D.C. It is about 200 miles long from the northern part of the bay, the Susquehanna River, to the south where it empties into the Atlantic Ocean. It is famous for its crabs and oysters. Famous bays. Georgian Bay. Most bays are located along ocean coastlines, but not all. Georgian Bay is found on the shores of Lake Huron, one of the 5 Great Lakes of North America. Georgian Bay is located in the Canadian province of Ontario. It is about 120 miles long and about 50 miles wide. This means that Georgian Bay is almost as big as Lake Ontario, one of the other 5 Great Lakes. There are thousands of islands in Georgian Bay, including Manitoulin Island, the world's largest island that is located in a freshwater lake. Famous bays. Guanabara Bay. Have you ever heard of Rio de Janeiro? It is a big city in Brazil that is famous for its carnival parades in February. It is a beautiful city with beaches and mountains, and it sits on the harbor of Rio de Janeiro. But this harbor's real name is Guanabara Bay. Guanabara means bay similar to a sea in the language of the Tupi, an indigenous people of the area. It is the second largest bay in Brazil and is about 19 miles long and about 17 miles wide. This bay was formed by erosion from the Atlantic Ocean. Famous bays. Hudson Bay. Hudson Bay is a large saltwater bay located in northeastern Canada. It is the second largest bay in the world after the Bay of Bengal, and it is very shallow compared to the Bay of Bengal. Hudson Bay is about 850 miles long and about 650 miles wide. It is connected to two oceans, the Arctic Ocean to the north and the Atlantic Ocean to the east. At the southern end of Hudson Bay is James Bay. So James Bay is a bay within a bay. Hudson Bay is not as saline as an ocean, and it freezes over from December to June. Interesting facts. Victoria Harbor in Hong Kong is one of the deepest bays in the world and a good place to see all the skyscrapers on Hong Kong Island. The Bay of Santorini, located in the Aegean Sea and part of Greece, is surrounded by what's left over from a huge volcanic eruption thousands of years ago. Cruise ships can only visit two bays on the continent of Antarctica. They are Nico Harbor and Paradise Bay. Port Jackson is the name of the harbor of Sydney, one of the world's most interesting cities with the famous Sydney Opera House and Sydney Harbor Bridge. Hanauma Bay in Hawaii is famous for its coral reefs, its many kinds of marine wildlife, and its very clear waters. San Francisco Bay is known for many things, including its fog, the Golden Gate Bridge, and Alcatraz Island. The Bay of Islands is a beautiful bay in New Zealand, and many people visit it to see its 144 islands and its dolphins, penguins, and whales. The Bay of Valdez Peninsula in Argentina is famous for its marine animals like elephant seals, fur seals, and sea lions. The Bay of Kotor, located in Montenegro, on the Adriatic Sea, is one of the most beautiful bays in Europe, with many beaches, resorts, and towns. The Bay of Fundy, on the Atlantic coast of Canada, has very high and low tides. The difference between the two can be over 50 feet. Phang Nga Bay, located near Phuket in Thailand, is full of exotic islands and sea caves. Halong Bay in Vietnam has almost 2,000 tall limestone rock islands that rise up out of the bay and are covered with tropical plants.